it is changing things fast, much faster than we realize, because as the algorithms are improving, we talk about ChatGPT, the text generative algorithms, they're becoming better at generating code, right? So you can use those to generate code, and therefore your ability to improve the code of these things that generate code exponentially accelerates. So you're having this breakneck speed change that's being thrust upon the all human enterprise, and at the same time the speed of change is accelerating at a acceleration that we just can't really comprehend. We'll only truly understand the implications when things have changed beyond recognition again.
Greetings, friends. Welcome to episode 179 of Into the Necrosphere. This week, I am joined by Nathanael Underwood, the frontman for the band Damim. He was my second ever guest on the podcast way back when they had, actually, I think it's probably about a couple of months after they'd released their last record, A Fine Game of Nil. Great to have him on then, even better to have him on this time round. Prepare yourselves for a intellectual and ultimately entertaining conversation where we covered everything from music to AI to the culture to comic books and much, much more. Before we get to that, though, Salt are a band out of Bloomington, Illinois. They have got one full-length under their belt. That full-length is called Voidsick. But more recently, they've released a fantastic split EP with another great band called Ophidian Shrine. That EP is called In Consortium Diaboli. Inexplicably, Salt are unsigned, and so therefore I decided that I needed to bring them to you, the legions. So for your listening pleasure, this is Salt with A Dying Age.
Price
From the mean streets of Bloomington, Illinois, that was Salt with a Dying Age off their new split EP in Consortium Diaboli, also featuring the talents of Ophidian Shrine. I'll play some of their music on next week's podcast, but great stuff. And do make sure that if you liked what you heard, you head over to their Bandcamp, check out their music, maybe part with a few ducats to show them some love and support, and let them know that it was old Jackson at Into the Necrosphere that sent you. If you are new to the podcast and you like what you've heard so far, make sure that you elbow drop the subscribe button on your platform of choice. Follow me on social media. And if you really want to show your love and support for the podcast, make sure you check out the Into the Necrosphere Teespring store. Buy yourself some Into the Necrosphere branded goodies and merchandise, whatever catches your fancy, and know that whatever pennies you spend on there will be plowed straight back into the podcast. Coming up later on in the show, I am going to be doing a full review roundup of releases from the last 7 days. I don't know whether May the 26th has some sort of cosmic significance, but if we were to see the fourth horseman of the apocalypse galloping across the horizon soon, I would not be surprised, because there were no less than 8 absolutely brilliant releases over the weekend, and I'm going to tell you all about them. Speaking of horsemen, I'm part of a shadowy and clandestine group of men who themselves go by the moniker The Horsemen of the Podcasting Apocalypse. I speak, of course, of Brandon Legion, who comes at you every Monday with his excellent horror-themed podcast, Horrible 666. Then, of course, there's me, yours truly, casting hexes and slaying poses every Tuesday on Into the Necrosphere. Sensei Mike Hill brings you a sinister smorgasbord of everything from musicians to artists to MMA fighters and a whole lot more in between. With his long-running weekly podcast, Everything Went Black, they, a couple of weeks ago, passed the 300-episode mark, so going strong, stronger than ever, I would argue. So make sure that you support that. Also make sure that you return every Thursday, because Mike Hill will be back with my favorite podcast of the week, Necromaniacs, where he and his co-hosts Jeff Kashid and Mike Scandado review horror movies, both old and new. And then finally, every Sunday, the Reverend Carl Haikara brings you the weird, the arcane, and the esoteric with his weekly podcast, Soul Knocks. So a treasure trove of wholesome, intellectually stimulating, and hopefully thoroughly enjoyable content coming your way. You get Saturdays off. The rest of the time, we've got you covered. Right now, my friends, sit back and enjoy as I welcome back to the podcast for the second time, definitely not the last time, Nathanael Underwood of Damim. Right, there we go. So, yeah, for folks joining us now, we've just been talking about the merits of YouTube over the other podcast mediums that I use. And no, what you were saying about it, I think people taking value from being able to see the nonverbal cues and things like that. I mean, I do see that definitely with the show. There are, there's quite a few folks that'll watch, episodes end to end, and I can see that on the, the number of minutes. You can kind of see your minutes in the drop-off point. A fair few people stick around for the whole thing, but yeah, I mean, me personally, with something like Lex Friedman, I have to say, I do err on the side of my consumption on YouTube tends to be shorter form videos, because I think because of work, generally speaking, I always feel so rushed. I can sometimes barely get myself to commit to watching a movie. So it's like, because I think to myself, okay, if this movie sucks, it's an hour and a half of my time wasted. So I get that people multitask. That's how I consume all podcasts. No matter what it is. If I'll do stuff around the house, or be busy with something else, and I'll have my headphones on, and I'll be listening. Or I do it when I'm driving. But if they want to watch, great. I'm definitely all for that.
So, I mean, it's ironic. Obviously, there's the kind of the red light syndrome. As soon as you press record, the kind of thoughts just vanish. Yeah. But I was just highlighting the fact that, paradoxically, given the era of the short attention span that we are currently in, and that I think everyone is affected by in some measure, I certainly know I am. It's excruciatingly annoying as well. But paradoxically, these long form podcasts and videos that have no place anymore in mainstream media have actually found a home in this in both podcasts and YouTube. So to have 3-4 hour long videos is as viable content that people will watch either end to end or just pick the bits that they're interested in is interesting, is telling, and actually a reason to be hopeful, I would say.
Yeah, I've pondered that before, because you look at the you look at the narrative that people's attention spans are getting shorter, and I mean I can definitely see validity to that narrative without a shadow of a doubt. But then, to your point, you also look at some of the view numbers on Lex Friedman's podcast, on Rogan when he was still posting full-length podcasts on YouTube, and on a number of other long form podcasts, and you're talking of numbers that easily dwarf what you would see, the ratings that mainstream news would get, for example. So then it has given me pause for thought, because I think to myself, well, if it's true that people's attention span is shrinking, I mean, explain those numbers to me, because it's that definitely 1.5 or 2 million or 3 million people watching a Lex Friedman interview, that's not an insignificant number whatsoever. Actually, just whilst we speak, let me have a gander at some of his him being a good example, because he's also not exactly the most animated guy. So what's been his recent numbers? So he's had Stephen Wolfram, 522,000. David Pacman, 410,000. Okay, so he seems to average about 500,000, but then he's also had an hour-long video of him talking about 1984, and that did 1.2 million. So it's and again, also he's as we've just said, now he's not alone. He's one of many people doing that.
To your other point about firstly multitasking and not wanting to commit to something that's an hour long or whatever, again, there's a paradox there, because you'll go for these episodic formats or these short form videos where you have the length of the video around 10-12 minutes, and you'll just start consuming them like popcorn, as it were, right? And you'll do one and then the other and then the other, and I guess I suffer from a similar affliction to you, in terms of, well, I need to research things, I need to absorb content, subject matter, whether it's to do with lyrics or to kind of inspire myself with new aesthetic experiences, right? And it's challenging to sit yourself down and to just allow yourself to be immersed in it, in with that kind of state of flow and relaxation that you let's call it almost non-mindful mindfulness. I'm not entirely sure how to express it properly, but I think you understand what I mean.
Well,
right?
you immediately make me think of the fact that I'm sitting here saying I don't want to commit to an hour and a half movie because it might be shit. But then, I've recently got into a TV show. I've just completed it, actually. Copycat Killer. It's a South Korean detective show on Netflix. Fantastic show. Every episode is an hour and 10 minutes easily. And we went through, when me and Paige were really into it, 3-4 episodes on the bounce. So it is.
The thing with Korean shows is that they're very good at the cliffhanger.
Yeah.
So you get to the end of the show and they'll sort of dangle something in front of you and then go cut. And so it's easier than maybe other the types of episodes that you get from other geographically based industries, right? So
just on the South Korean stuff, there's an interesting psychology to me in South Korean television and especially in movies, but I mean both are very similar. That I really gravitate towards, and I think it makes me enjoy and invest more in those shows than I've done in a lot of American stuff over the last couple of years. And that is, to me, the degree of weight and like emotional weight that they attach to the concept of death. So where you'll get a TV show, or like let's take a recent movie like Evil Dead Rise. My fellow horsemen of the podcasting apocalypse were talking about this specifically in their last episode where they reviewed that. They were saying, there's somebody who's just killed a family member, and they kind of the show just goes on. It's like, well, nothing, no big deal. Just killed my sister. Whereas I find as violent and brutal and over the top as South Korean shows can get, like if you take arguably one of the most popular South Korean properties, Squid Games. Like every single death, of a leading character, of a character that had some degree of prominence, really did mean something. It kind of, either you were pleased the person died, or you really felt it. I mean, not to give any spoilers away, but there's a particular death in the just to so you know which one I'm referring to, the marbles episode. Which I when we were done with that episode, I sat there in complete and utter silence, and I turned to Paige and I said, I don't know what to say. I don't think I've ever seen television that has emotionally hit me that hard ever.
Let's say that the topic of South Korean shows is an interesting one because, well, in general, full stop, and for me specifically, because during lockdown, I after going through all of the kung fu films on Netflix, sprawled on the sofa, wondering if we were ever going to be let out of our own houses ever again. I had this suggestion that came up, which was Kingdom. I didn't watch Squid Game, by the way. So and
oh, you haven't seen it yet?
No, but I don't care about spoilers. So
okay, all right.
Don't hold back for me anyway. But I watched Kingdom, and it took a few episodes to start up, and then it, it's quite. I found it an engaging show with an interesting approach, and it was my first experience with the kinds of tropes that are common in South Korean media, TV, film, etc. And I did kind of go down that rabbit hole with historical K-drama and that sort of stuff. But what's interesting is what a lot of these historical shows actually have some relationship with historical events, even if they're obviously dramatized and embellished and all that stuff. So what I tended to do was when I came across some interesting facts, I would look them up and I would say, okay, well, this happened and this happened and this is a real person and they did that and this might have been a real person and there's legends about them. But what's interesting is to sort of correlate that with what I mean with what can be perceived about South Korean society and what can be known about the Korean Peninsula in general, such as the fact that the kind of the North Korean system is actually far closer to feudal Korea than you might imagine without looking further into it. They had this thing called the sacred bone caste system, right? Where you could only go down by intermarrying with somebody of a lower caste, kind of thing. And there is a similar system in North Korea where you have I'm not sure they have different, they call them apples. So you have the kind of the red apples, which are the core of the truest, and then you have the rotten apples at the bottom, and there's no hope for them whatsoever. And then the ones in the middle, I suppose the middle class. But again, I think my understanding, I could be wrong about this, but my understanding is you can only marry downwards, and there is an absolute ruler who's deified and whatnot. So it's another thing I discovered was that I think Korea was pretty much feudal until just over 100 years ago, which is for us it's shocking to think about that, and how so I suppose it explains some of the attitudes that come through. And there's also this concept of destiny that always runs through these TV shows. So, if you see a sort of some innocent folk, people of the people having an innocently banal time and having dreams of a simple life, like they're going to die or something really tragic is going to happen. So it's been an interesting journey, discovering all that sort of stuff. But
the thing that I mean, so just on the topic of death, I think just to also clarify why I like that is because it as you say, it incentivizes me to invest. Like if the filmmaker or the person writing the script for the TV show, the TV runner, if they care about the character, then I ought to care for the character. So that then because you're invested in the story, everything in the story means a lot more to you. I think what was great about Copycat Killer as an example is the guy who's the sort of lead investigator. They call him the prosecutor. He's a very fallible, in some cases, pretty weak man. He's not a particularly, he's definitely no sort of muscle bound guy. He's not Sylvester Stallone in Cobra. Crime is the disease, and I'm the cure kind of guy. And the cool thing is you've kind of alluded to some of it already. The logic that runs through South Korea, because of the difference in culture and background and stuff like that, it's very, very different to the West. So even if a show starts off as being one thing, you take, again, one of the more famous movies like Old Boy as an example, it starts off being one thing. You never know where it's going to end off, because it will always spiral off into all sorts of crazy, directions that you do not see coming. Squid Game was like that as well. I consciously ignored Squid Games because of all the hype around it. Yes. And I thought to myself, you fucking morons. I've been into South Korean movies for ages. Now you're getting into this shit. And then we'd finished watching something that I can't even remember what it was. We finished watching Last of Us. We'd really enjoyed that. And I was like, don't know what to watch next. Let's just give Squid Games a try. And I was blown away. I was like, it's one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. Absolutely superb. So I could not recommend it more highly.
Yeah, dead air again as I failed to remember the thing that I was going to talk about. Oh yes, that was it. So you're talking about the way that the stories spiral into these unexpected directions. I actually found that the storytelling is a lot more familiar and comprehensible, I would say, in terms of the South Korean drama than some of the kung fu films that I watched and came across, where you have the first 2/3 of the film, which are almost like a comedy, and all these kind of jovial characters, and there's some tragedy, but they kind of get over it, and there's the hero's journey, and then suddenly in the last quarter of the film it turns into an absolute bloodbath, and then they're just walking away into the sunset, and cut, that the film ends, right? I found that less, I mean, it's entertaining, but it's not quite as satisfying in storytelling terms as the let's say techniques and motifs used in South Korean drama. And given our, when I say our, as a band, our investment in storytelling, given the kind of the comic enterprise that we've launched into, especially after the first issue, I started looking into storytelling, how to structure things, or how things are classically structured, shall we say, and whatnot. So that's, and once you start doing that, it's like it's a bit like when I studied audio, and I re-listened to Necroticism and by Carcass, and all I could hear was that bloody snare drum. Like it was all like, so it's the same thing when you start to watch familiar episodes of or just a new story or film. It's almost difficult to not go, okay, well, that's the midpoint. This is where things are changing for the characters, and this is where they kind of take charge of the story.
Yes, yeah. I was about to say, yes, the arc.
Yeah.
I was just going to joke and say, you can tell you've done a fair few interviews yourself, because that was a beautiful segue, and I was kind of going to work it in as well. Beautiful segue into talking about the Bloodied. Now, for folks that don't know, because the majority of my audience is in the States, the Bloodied is a comic book that you guys put out, I think it was about 18 months ago now, 2 years ago?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah.
So it's, well, in between the bouts of existential despair, sprawled on a sofa, watching kung fu films and historical K-drama, we did write some new music, and it involved me with a Reaper and Pro Tools and whatnot. But since we couldn't collaboratively do anything, we were scratching our heads trying to think, how can we do something that's a little bit more collaborative and engaging, that we can do over the distance which separates us. And I suppose everybody's had an idea whereby they would love to see themselves as a comic character, or they have this idea for a story about their band and whatnot. And but I'd had this for some years now, in my kicking about in my head, and this was just the perfect set of circumstances, or as perfect as they were going to get, because we had this artist who'd done our t-shirt, this chap Alan O'Neill, who's done a few comics and a lot of artwork, and he's done some shirts for Conan, if you're familiar. All their pixel art. He's really good he's very versatile, very good at a whole host of things. And because he had comics experience and insight, and he'd soaked up enough of that culture, shall we say, right, more so than I have, we teamed up with him and we wrote this story. I kind of created the arc and the main the flow of it, and then I got together with our drummer Flo, pun unintended, but it's inevitable from time to time. And we bashed out the dialogue together, because he's quite good at coming up with sort of snappy one-liners and ways to make the script more entertaining, and basically created this thing. And wait, let me try and find one. Here it is. Yep, there you go. This is the cover. Hopefully trying to avoid the reflection. So this was our first attempt at creating something like that, and I wouldn't say we made it up as we went along, because there was a plan, there was an arc, there was a story, and there was a lot of background to make sense of to try and convey through the script, right? It was interesting to be confronted with the need to make certain things explicit, or enough of them explicit, to create an engaging enough story that people will, not just be attracted by the artwork, but want to understand more as they turn the pages. And that was a whole journey in itself. And as we went through it, I knew it was going to look good, but was it going to be worthwhile? Was it going to be worth the investment and whatnot? And looking at it, I'm proud of what we've done, and I think it stands as a work in itself. It was supposed to be a kind of, I don't want to say marketing gimmick, because I hate marketing gimmicks, but it was more of a thing to attract more listeners, I suppose, to broaden our audience, as well as to consolidate the team spirit. But then we went to this friend of mine suggested launching it at a Comic-Con, and the kind of the finishing of it coincided with the starting of, I don't know, whatever Comic-Con season, and the the end of the strictest lockdown measures. So we went and did that, and it sold really well. And we sold, because as you may or may not be aware, there's a fair amount of overlap between fans of the metal music and nerds. So we sold a fair few records as well, LPs as well, CDs, T-shirts, blah blah. At the first Comic-Con, and that really made me think, well, actually, there's more to it than that. And so it was always supposed to be a bigger arc, right? But now we have more of a reason to continue with it. And I'd say issue 2 is nearly finished. The aim is to have it ready by the next Comic-Con, which I think it will be. I'm really pushing Alan to do it. But it's the storytelling has taken on, like, on all fronts. We've learned from our first journey and improved things and taking things up a notch, the gear, etc. And the visuals that Alan has come up with are brilliant.
I was going to ask you that, actually. That must have been one of the coolest experiences, or coolest parts of the experience, is seeing your ideas, your script come to life in those visuals. Because I would assume you would have shared stuff with him, said, this is kind of what we're seeing, and then he starts getting the actual graphic, the actual artwork across to you. That must have been fucking awesome.
What's interesting is just firstly confronting yourself, or being confronted with actually how much work it is to get this to create this, because I don't know, a part of your subconscious thinks, well, it's just printed media, it's just images, it's like, and it's comics, so it's almost less of an investment than a proper book, shall we say, right? There's some sort of part of you that hasn't really thought this through, that makes these assumptions. And actually, as you get into it, you realize that actually you have to strip things down, you have to simplify them, you have to convey them in a certain way. There's this great example of the sort of, because we had to do a bit of exposition in the first issue. I've avoided that as much as possible by demonstration prior to the plot device being used, that sort of thing, right? So a great example of this in film is, if you've seen Tremors. If you haven't seen okay, well, so there's this fridge at the beginning that's on the fritz, and they're in this bar, and it sort of blurts out and buzzes and goes wrong, and they kick it or something, so that when later on they're being let's say threatened by these carnivorous sandworms that are sensitive to sound, and they're in this room trying to make as little noise as possible, and the fridge goes wrong and makes this sound and alerts the creature, it's a natural plot development, right? It flows naturally. So rather than somebody trying to explain why they've gone to hyperspeed when they've never done that before at any point in the franchise, in a quiet couple of sentences, it's just a lot more demonstrative, natural way to present a story. So that's the sort of thing that we're bearing in mind, and that I think is going to really enrich the final product. And yes, I'm really looking forward to it. And I don't want to reveal too many things, but there are extra things, like I'm working to get other comic book artists to create sort of extra value for it, shall we say, by creating pin-up on characters and anyway. So yeah.
That one of those comic book artists, may he potentially be the drummer of a band that
oh no,
is legendary on the
no, actually, that's a good point. I haven't really had an in-depth conversation with Dave about this, even though he's ostensibly implicitly featured in the first issue, but no, we're talking people who've drawn Judge Dredd comics and that sort of thing. So it's you basically people we met through the nerd conventions.
Yeah. Judge Dredd artwork for me has just always been absolutely top notch. I mean, I remember getting 2000 AD magazines like way back. We're talking like almost, I think it's like 1994, 1995. Like immediately post apartheid when that sort of stuff started to trickle into the country, and I was in love with Dredd. Judge Dredd to me was one of potentially my favorite comic books of all time. I think the movie, I think the 2012 or 2013 movie, I thought was so cool, and I was so desperately hoping that they would get this Megacity 1 series off the ground and actually do it justice in the same vein that they did with that movie. But sadly, I don't know whether that's going to happen. But one thing I wanted to say as a comment on the comic book that you guys did, I think the biggest compliment I can give you with that is because you mentioned a marketing tool. The best thing about it is that it never came across as that, right? So, Slayer, Metallica, a lot of bands have done their own comic books. Like, Slayer had that Repentless comic book that they did in 2017 on Dark Horse, and it was just trash. It was like it was written by a 12-year-old for 12-year-olds, and it's just that sort of stuff. Maybe because I'm old and grumpy, but I can never take it seriously. It's because I grew up, collecting comic books. I have a very substantial collection, and I always gravitated towards stuff that wasn't necessarily completely underground, but was certainly off the beaten track a little bit. So I know what great comic books should read like and feel like and things like that. And just much of the stuff that other bands have done, it reminded me of those little comics that you got with the Masters of the Universe action figures. They like that little tiny comic you got with each figurine. But what you guys put out, I think, was a genuinely high quality product, and it looked fantastic. Story was great. So I wanted to make sure I conveyed that to you, because I think kudos.
Thank you.
It could very easily have gone a different route, but
indeed
there's real integrity to what you guys did there.
Well, I think one of the things that helps is that whenever we endeavor to do something, to create something, I for one, but I think everybody who's involved treats it as an end in itself, and I'd say that's part of the ethos of the band, full stop. When whether we're rehearsing or driving to the next show, or that's or playing or writing a song or creating a shirt or any part of the process, the journey, the work that we do collectively is an end in itself. So that had to be approached with that kind of seriousness and work ethic and aesthetic ethic, for lack of a better way of putting it. So yes, that's thank you. And one of the things that we are working to incorporate in it is one of the aspects that's always appealed to me about things like stories with let's say extrapolated circumstances or sort of fictional parameters, so like science fiction, fantasy, etc. Those kinds of environments can firstly, just to imagine that there's a device that can allow you to create portals between worlds or something like that, right? Just as an example, that in itself is cool to imagine. But the point is, you can actually give an arena for interesting thought experiments, right? I feel that sci-fi in particular lends itself to that sort of thing. But I'm not to say that we're going to approach things in any way that sort of pretentious, lofty aspiration. It's more of a kind of fun story rather than the po-faced serious existential nonsense.
I was just about to say, so you're not going to try and do Interstellar seen through the eyes of the band Damim.
No. No, it's more, and the other thing is there's jokes in the script. Like there's a comedic aspect. It's a bit more, there's more levity. Like that's the thing, right? I had seen some of the comics that you mentioned, some of them that have been distributed through potentially known music distribution companies that buy certain bands, and they're very serious, and it's like I am the Lord of Darkness and I will consume you, without any trace of irony, right? In it, all that, and I really wanted to avoid just that sort of nonsense. So I've spoken to people about it who maybe are deep in the scene or are in bands themselves, and I said, well, it's a bit more lighthearted. They're jokes, and they're like, jokes with disgust, right? And I just don't think it would have been as palatable if we had. Yeah, it's just a completely different medium that lends itself to a different tone. So I wanted to adapt the approach to that, and I like to think it has worked. Some people seem to agree. Yeah.
Sorry, I got waylaid there. So, I mean, obviously, you're not going to attempt to do a comic book yourself if you're not you weren't a fan of the medium growing up. Well, what sort of stuff were you into growing up? And do you still collect? Are you still into it at all?
I wouldn't say I'm into it, which is ironic for somebody who is involved in the creation of the comic.
Yeah,
but. And you mentioned 2000 AD. I have had my encounters with that publication. But if you go further back, given that I grew up in my childhood was in France, you come with that culture of comics, right? The comic book culture is a big thing, which ironically is and isn't taken seriously. Like there's a very, very strong, very serious culture of very passionate individuals when it comes to comics, and you have things like, or works like, Asterix, or this artist Gottlieb. You may or may not know him. Who died a few years ago. There's obviously Mobius, the Incal. I would recommend. It blew my mind when I was like 7 years old, because it's quite. Some of it is quite macabre for a child to be acquainted with. But the sort of the host of French comics, I suppose, would have been the main thing.
Asterix, but Tintin, stuff like that.
Yeah, all of that. And actually, I picked this up because it was in a supermarket in Belgium. This thing here, and it's. If you look, just the visual aspect, I mean, it's not going to. But the layout struck me, the kind of the quality of the art, and
I mean, I just from what I can see, that's absolutely stunning.
And it was like it was €2 or something like that, and I just couldn't pass it up. And I think it's a mythological story, kind of reinvented and retold, and given my experience with comics, I had to pick it up and look at it and see things again through that lens, with an eye for all the detail, whether it's the layout, the typography, the flow of the story, all that sort of thing. So yes, I haven't really answered your question that conclusively, but I've given you some sort of an idea.
Yeah, no, it's. I mean, what I was more interested in that I picked up is that you grew up in France. I would have thought you would be, like the rest of the gang, a Berkshire boy or a Surrey boy.
Nope. So I mean, half family is French, the other half is English, and I've kind of been buffeted between the two, and influenced by both cultures in that way. And actually the fact that France, when I was growing up, was such a ghetto in cultural terms. I mean, in some ways it's brilliant because you have the kind of the quality of the life of quality of life and the appreciation of the art of living in a way that you don't find in the UK. I'm not saying that there is no appreciation for the art of living here, but it's a very different thing. And I think things like the fact that rationing was a thing well into was it even the beginning of the 60s that rationing stopped? I mean, I'm not sure, but I don't know,
but I think you're right. I think it did run for a very significant period of time.
I mean, for my father, the chicken was a thing that you had once a year at Christmas, and we're not talking about particular deprivation here. This was absolutely common for everyone, and like eggs were this powdered thing, and you had a ration book, and this was post-war. So I would say that this explains why this was the country of the ready meal and of industrial foods like baked beans and whatever, the golden syrup and stuff like that. Anyway, we can go down the food rabbit hole as well. But yeah, the fact that the I don't think I'd heard a distorted guitar until I was 11.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I'm serious. It was not in my, and it's not that I didn't grow up with a musically inclined parents, right? That they certainly were, but it's just that was not something that was on the radar. So when I heard, and actually, in my childhood, I did not understand why people's passions ran so high for music. I didn't understand why they could be so invested for what I perceived to just not elicit any particular emotions other than, sappy love songs with repetitive chorus that just trailed into nothing. It just didn't speak to me at all. So when I heard Iron Maiden, it was a revelation that medium could actually be used to express something other, something different, something that actually called to the way that I perceived the world as a kind of I guess a disturbing mess on some level, and that's it was all downhill from there. This Anthrax, Sepultura.
I was about to say, so Iron Maiden was the first metal band you heard?
Yes.
Can you remember the song or the album?
Oh yeah, Live After Death. Yeah, I was on holiday and this guy had a tape and a group of friends, and we put it on and just kept playing it, and then I had to go and get it.
Even though I'm not the biggest Iron Maiden fan, Live After Death, I absolutely concede is phenomenal, absolutely fantastic. And the other thing is the way you've just described the story there. I often talk about when I first heard AC/DC, or when I first when you first discover metal, for the people that are going to be in this for the rest of their life, it honestly feels the only way I can describe it to anybody. It's like discovering a limb that was missing, or like this, like it's discovering like this part of your brain you didn't know existed, and it just gets switched on and it stays on forever.
That's a very good way of putting it.
Yeah. But so you lived in France until what age?
11. So primary school was all in France, and then Belgium.
All right. Okay. And then when did you move to the UK?
when I was for college.
And why do you stay in the UK?
Because
which I ask as somebody who kind of is in the
I
similar boat,
understand.
right?
It's a valid question.
I get asked that question very often, like, why are you still here and not back in South Africa?
Well, firstly, part of my heritage is here, and growing up in Belgium, we had cable. Like the cable was standard at the time, so we got exposed to all these different channels. You know, you had ZDF and we had the French TV and we had the sort of Dutch channel, but we also had the BBC, and that's where we got where I was exposed to all this culture that I felt connected to, in more than just a kind of it was more than affinity. I felt right when I watch Red Dwarf or whatever, or the documentaries, etc. It was I had a connection with it, and I have a connection with UK. You know, with London, even specifically, my great uncle was a sort of real ale or ale wholesaler in pubs in southeast London, and he carried a kosh, a metal kosh, because people would try and mug him for the beer money. But so you know, it's there's a sense of connection here, and I always felt like I was missing out by not at least experiencing what life was here. And once you're here, London especially is difficult, as I'm sure you will appreciate. And the first few years were difficult. But once you've kind of established yourself, you've created links, bonds with other people, you've grown roots, it just becomes a natural extension of what you were doing at any particular moment, rather than a well detailed, thought out plan.
I completely agree. It's difficult, but I would say on the flip side, it's difficult to extract yourself from it as well.
Absolutely.
You know, I moving to the countryside. It was now I'm very pleased I did, and I don't have any regrets whatsoever. But I mean, I still miss some aspects of it. Like when I go to Kingston, you know, and I walk around there, I still miss the idea that I could just get up, walk down to the river. There are 20, 30 decent restaurants, within a 10-minute walking radius from me. Loads of bars, loads to do. There's a lot of very interesting, colorful characters all around wherever you look. My only one thing, and I've lamented this on the podcast before, but I do sometimes, especially in the last, I'd say 3-4 years, I look at English society, and the sense of, it's a sense of sadness and it's a sense of dread for what it means for the future. But it feels to me very often when I look at the UK, it feels like a country that's given up on itself. It got to a point where it was like, well, we just don't give a shit anymore. I spoke on last week's episode with Swartov about the fact that this country has a heritage of probably the greatest musical heritage in history. I mean, I don't really think there's a single country that can point to having spawned the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Motorhead, Deep Purple, Black Sabbath. I mean, the list of the most influential bands of all time goes on, and yet somehow there's no thought, no celebration, no nothing given to it. And it seems to be preoccupied with imitating with co-opting the worst mores and traits of North America. Would be my statement. Another, I'll pause there as I see you.
There's so many
gears turning in your head.
So many possible bits and pieces or possible avenues to go down with. You've touched on a whole number of things. So I'll try to stay reasonably brief. I often get told that I'm not that brief, but
My brain works like Jesse
Ventura
Ventura's minigun on Predator, by the way. So, because I often think that, like, when I ask a question,
yeah,
I'll say I'm just going to ask you one question, then I like scattergun for the of something that, as you say, is probably 30 or 40 questions rolled up into one.
So I think that the thing that you sort of touched on first, I wouldn't be as pessimistic. I do think that there's always been a sense of, as Pink Floyd put it, I think, quiet desperation as an intrinsic part of the English psyche, right? But in terms of the music itself, yes, I agree. I don't think it's... I mean, in terms of other countries that have contributed things to the musical arena, you might think of North America or Scandinavia. I think Sweden is known for being very strong in terms of its musical game, with good reason. Whether or not you appreciate ABBA, I can't say I've ever been a fan, although I respect their craft. It's like nails on a chalkboard as far as I'm concerned. But like I said, I respect their craft, and I think that comes from a kind of a culture that promotes that sort of thing, that encourages that kind of creation. And I remember being surprised when I heard of this. This is like in the 2000s. There was this concert with Satyricon that in London that was subsidized by the Norwegian government, and I found it striking that there would be this kind of initiative. And on one hand, I would like it if the let's say the authorities did encourage cultural endeavors in that way, with an even hand, I would add, which I have very little hope of ever happening. But on the other hand, it's maybe not a bad thing, because it means that the people who really will want to create will continue to create, and the things that happen to be in tune with the zeitgeist will find footing and be propelled forward, right? And I'm not including our endeavor in any way, shape, or form with that. We just are, and it needs to exist, right? But then you come to the conversation about the kind of the relevance of, or the importance of, music as an art form, right? That the way that it existed, that we perceive it, or I say we in the broadest, vaguest sense, right, has only been a thing for about maybe, at best a century, I think, right? Before that, there wasn't the recorded format. It was just, I suppose, word of mouth and performance, right? So that whole music industry in that way is almost a blip, and I'm wondering if we're not witnessing the end of that blip in that certain way, and a metamorphosis of that human concern, into something just atomized, or in the same way that I'm making an assumption here, but when you were growing up, when I was growing up, it was tape trading. Yeah, you needed to be part of an in-group.
I was about to say that was the biggest thing.
But you needed to know people who knew about the subculture, who knew the right bands, who had heard of them either through magazines, because we had no actual magazines of any worth in Belgium, by the way. It was a desert. So it was either my friends or the record shop. It was called Music Mania, right? You went, and that's where I discovered Autopsy on the strength of the record cover. That's where I discovered Emperor, actually on the strength of a review from Terrorizer, which I had to buy outside of Belgium in order to get it. But you went there, you listened to it, and you decided there and then, or upon further listens, whether or not you wanted to buy it. But those were your sources. You had to be part of this community, and therefore it had more value because you had to earn it, right? And I'm this isn't a kind of exercise in gatekeeping, although the merits and demerits of gatekeeping are another discussion entirely. But it was more about the fact that it really was something that you needed to work to discover for, and you had to. That meant that when you had the article, you valued your experience of it and listened to it at least a couple of times before you decided that it was unlistenable tripe or worth further listens, or etc. So then the kind of the experiential part of music was more significant, and you created a stronger bond to it than I would argue people do these days. When new music, it's not even 2 clicks away, right? Now you have these algorithms spoon feeding you what the algorithm decides is you're most likely to have an affinity to, right? So that it's kind of removing not only the sense of community, but any kind of brain work required to decide what you're going. But so on the one hand you have that, on the other hand have you watched Demolition Man?
Yeah,
right,
many times.
So you the part,
you mean the prophecy of our future.
Yes, where people are really into jingles, right? So I think in a sense that has come true. I mean, it's not quite as dire and caricatured as that moment, but there is certainly a grain of truth in that, let's say, for the larger public. But it also means that I think as a teenager nowadays, music just doesn't have the weight. It's not the cultural currency that it used to be when we were growing. It doesn't have that same countercultural potential, that same tribe definition, because also the supposed nonsense feud between death and black metal, right, the communities and whatever, that thing that barely exists anymore. All the extremes are mixed up, and it goes beyond metal. You have these extreme artists that kind of cross pollinate and just sometimes pick up instruments and then the rest of the time have a backing track, and then sort of have the whole notion of performance has changed. So this comes back to, is this enthusiasm and passion for music as an art form in the way that it has existed in the last century or so? Is it just a bubble? Is it going to fade into this kind of strange atomized caricature or version of itself, or Fourier transform of what it used to be, or is it going to maintain cultural importance in the kind of certain select in-groups? I would say probably the latter, but we don't know yet what artificial intelligence is going to do to the creative process. And again, that comes back to what you were asking about, the kind of the emulation of what I think you were alluding to in terms of the direction of the musical creators in this country, whether there was any sense of their heritage as a nation. And I think that's going to be made even more into an irrelevance as we tend towards the AI generated grey goo that we seem to be fed whether by the Spotify algorithm or just by, artificial generative algorithms.
What's your take on where that could go, where that might go? I mean, my reflexive response to that is that I hate the idea of it, and that I think that truly expressive art that is an authentic expression of what the artist wants to convey to me, I think that's always going to come screaming out. But then, you make a very good point there. I'm 43 years old. I'm not 16. I'm not 17 years old. I have a different connection to the art form than somebody who's 16 or 17 right now. Because again, I exactly the same as you. I remember the excitement of tape trading. I remember the excitement of discovering a new band on a cover CD, or leafing through. I've spoken about this many times. Leafing through a copy of Metal Maniacs in a bookstore because there was imported magazines, so I was too poor to afford one. So I leaf through it, and you sit writing notes. Okay, I'm going to check out this band. I need to check out this band, and that's how you pick up Ceremony of Opposites, or how you pick up Battles in the North. And it's like the anticipation of hearing this new thing that you're excited about, and then when it's as good as you in your mind's eye you envisioned it, it's fucking incredible. But kids today, they don't know what that feels like. They don't know what it feels like to wait 3 months for a CD you ordered overseas to finally turn up, and it's like all your Christmases coming at once when it happens. So by extension, would they care that music is being created by AI and not by an actual artist? I as you've kind of said that now, I'm sitting here wondering, and part of me kind of goes that potentially they won't.
I think potentially many won't, but you don't invest yourself in an aesthetic like heavy metal, right? To coin in the broadest term. If you're truly worried about the majority, right, or even anyone beyond your own, or anything beyond your own connection to the music. Okay, if you do care about that, then you have the ability, your soul doesn't call to something specific, as it did for heavy metal in my case, and I imagine in yours as well. Then you can choose something else that's a lot more attuned to what people tend to like and dance to and whatnot. But that's just not why you pick up a guitar and make disgusting noise. It just isn't. So my guess is, and my intuition is, that I would say even more so than for graphic arts, because there's an immediacy to music that, as in order to exist as a thing, right, you need to experience it as part of the flow of time, right? The flow of time is intrinsic to music. It's something graphical is static and unchanging. You can just look at it, and that's why I think it's a lot more susceptible to the deceptions of artificial intelligence, in a way, right? There's something intrinsically performative about sound, not that it can't be generated by AI or even convincingly generated by AI, but there is something that I find, and I could be proven wrong within the next 6 months to 5 years or whatever, but I do think that there is going to be some sustained value in the performative aspect, right? And there will be a core of people, including, I think, younger people, who will, like we did when we discovered heavy metal, have that part of their brain switched on when they go, oh, that's what it's about. That's what it feels like when you're in the room with 4 people actually making that sound in a way that nobody else can.
Mm.
Right, and there's something special to that, just as there is, I suppose, in the ability to create with just pen, pencil, and paper an image that captures something vital and immediate about life.
Yeah,
right? I really think there's some value to that. And the other thing about these, well, it's such a broad discussion, but in the same way as you have the latest tool in music, right? The neural DSP. I while I appreciate that it's a useful tool, it's something that I would never consider using in a recording, right? For those who aren't intrinsically familiar, and I'm assuming we have a large contingent of audio nerds joining us on this podcast, if they have bothered to continue listening 1 hour into the podcast.
They're very open-minded.
Anyway, for those who aren't, the Neural DSP is a brand that creates these processing components, that software components that process your audio, and they make standalone hardware, and it's completely in the box. It's completely computer generated. And while I'm not an equipment snob, in fact, I find equipment snobbery to be tedious, to say the least. But it's the latest shiny thing, and Gojira have their own version of the plugin, sort of thing. It's I think it's Gojira branded, and you can sound like Gojira if you and it's the latest shiny thing that everybody is gravitating to, and that a lot of people are using. And in the same way as Drum Kit from Hell was in the sort of the, I guess, mid 2000s, after Meshuggah released Catch 33, which was, I don't know if it was programmed or if it was played and replaced with that, and it became the sort of
I think it was played and replaced, but yeah, no, I remember that very well.
But the whole, oh wow, you can actually make a credible drum track with this incredible software, and it just became the thing, which was the sort of the lazy option in a way. I mean, the easy way to get a quote unquote professional sounding thing, which then just became the thing that made you sound like everyone else, right? I suppose. And this is what I'm getting at with Neural DSP. Everybody's using it, and yes, it's versatile. Yes, you can program anything with it, etc., etc. But I'm very, very wary of this sort of thing, and I'm my bread and butter is in tech, and software, so I'm quite attuned to the fluctuations of the cutting edge of technology. So when I remember hearing about GPT-3 far before it was a thing with ChatGPT, and I don't know if you remember the story of a GPT-3 trained bot posting on Reddit, and people not realizing on the forum that it was actually a bot until a week later, and it had been posting these quite comprehensive responses and involved responses, and this was around 2020, and the only reason why people discovered that it was or had a clue that it might not be human was the speed with which it came up with these responses, right? So I've always been on the lookout for this, and then Mid-Journey came about, and again, the first few images that came out of it were stunning. If you, I've heard people say, oh yes, but it's not as this and there's that as like a human artist. It's like, you haven't been paying attention. You've just been looking at the wrong images, because it's bloody amazing. It's really, really convincing. And my inclination in terms of incorporating that sort of thing into our work. Because, sometimes I'll use an AI generated thing for like a story on Instagram, something ephemeral, right? But I'm never going to use anything like that in terms of the sort of the serious part, the actual delivery of what we do has to be human. And I'm not excluding the potential for AI generated stuff to be incorporated somehow, but it has to be worked in. And this is, even then, I would have to consider the ethics of something that's been trained on thousands and thousands and thousands of works, including, by the way, our previous album covers. So if you do the search, I can't remember what the website is, but it will search the stuff that Midjourney has, and I think Stable Diffusion have been trained on, and you'll see, oh well, there's our previous album cover. So that they didn't ask us about using that. So there is that. But you're kind of, in one way, you're faced with a discussion that has to do with that is similar to the discussion about collage and sampling. And the kind of the law fell on, well, if it's something like less than 2 bars or a certain amount of time, then it's legitimate use because it's kind of reinventing it and using it to a completely different aesthetic effect. But this is, on one hand, it's similar to this. On the other hand, it's actually very much uncharted territory and completely different. And to repeat something that I'm sure has been often repeated, it is changing things fast, much faster than we realize, because as the algorithms are improving, we talk about ChatGPT, the text generative algorithms, they're becoming better at generating code, right? So you can use those to generate code, and therefore your ability to improve the code of these things that generate code exponentially accelerates. So you're having this breakneck speed change that's being thrust upon all human enterprise, and at the same time the speed of change is accelerating at a acceleration that we just can't really comprehend. We'll only truly understand the implications when things have changed beyond recognition again. And this applies to the world of artistic expression and creation. To quote someone, some meme that's been oft reposted, I'm sure, something like, I wanted robots to do the boring work like the housework, not to write poetry and make music. But here we are, and it's going to become part of the creative arsenal of people who actually make stuff that matters and is relevant. That's my intuition.
So it's interesting that we're talking about neural DSP again. Another part of the conversation I had last week was around the feeling that is created in the studio setting or in certain rooms. Like, you go back to some of the all-time classic albums and you put them on a high-end hi-fi system, and you really can kind of get a sense of the acoustic, the vibe in that room. And if you go to stuff that we're all into, you can take some of the by I guess by audio purist standards, some of the shoddiest recordings, but you couldn't possibly replace, through, I believe, any form of emulation, the authentic feeling you get from hearing a song like Dunkelheit by Burzum, or even closer to home, because I was listening to the album earlier today, Enraptured by Evil by Akrakaka or something like that. I mean, there's just a vibe to what's going on there that is, I'm not sure that AI would ever be able to truly replicate that, because it is something you can't put your finger on, but you know that it's there. And if it were gone, you would know it's gone as well.
I think part of it is the fact that I mean, there's a combination of subjectivity and objectivity that, if we're going to start going down the route of the value of art and what makes it relevant or valuable, ultimately you can go to either extreme. There's the kind of the objective skill and ability to tap into something that's culturally relevant by the creator, and at the other end of the scale, you've got the intensely personal connection between that particular individual who's in the audience and that particular work, and the history between those two components, right? So and then there's the fact that whatever you listen to is ultimately a constructed illusion, right? Whether or not, some of the stuff that you mentioned, well, it's the feeling of the room. Well, also it's the feeling of something that's directly plugged via a metal zone into a 4-track tape recorder or something like that, or maybe it's originally recorded DI and then it's reamped in a room. I could be, same to extend that. My impression is listening to Dead Congregation. I can't remember the album. Is it Grave of the Archangels? Is that the album?
Yeah,
whatever. So. That one, the feedback, especially having been in very loud rehearsal rooms, the quality of the feedback, it sounds like they are actually in the room with the amps on 11. There's something about that, but I could be wrong. It could be just them reamping it. Either way, it's it sounds great, and it's a kind of relatively, it's not recent anymore, is it? But
no, I mean, that's I think that's 2008.
Okay, well, I guess it's earned its status as a death metal classic at this point.
Well, I was about to say it's because your perception of time, if I base it on how long it takes you guys to put out new music, is stretched.
Well, there's an extra dimension to that, which is firstly, if something, it is my opinion that if something is worth hearing and worth playing, then it doesn't stop being worth hearing and worth playing because the sort of statute of aesthetic limitations has expired. A work by someone you happen to remember but 50 years ago isn't any less worthwhile 50 years on or 100 years on. It'll still have that immediate effect on your brain, your perception, in some ways, regardless of your cultural predisposition, right? Which is obviously a part of how you perceive things. But that becomes particularly relevant if we talk about the most recent single that's come out, World Tone Hell, right? The refrain is quite old, right? That's sort of the main thing. I'd originally hesitated to use it because it had a sort of neoclassical major inclination almost, right? It's not really major, but there's something that is irritatingly termed as melodic in a sense, right? I don't agree with that terminology at all personally, but that's another discussion entirely. But those the sort of two main axes of that song are really quite old, and it just took a while for them to percolate, to become enmeshed with each other sufficiently with other parts that either I came up with or we came up with in the rehearsal room, and then we rehearsed so many times that it just became this convincing entity that stood in itself, even though it has these different aesthetics brought into it. You've definitely got some death metal, definitely got some black metal, there's definitely some thrashy aspects. There's solo at the end, but it works, and it works, I feel, in a way that stands in its own right and creates a like aesthetic feel that I think is distinct enough from anything else that is worth that it is relevant and it needs to exist.
Yeah. And I mean, I know it's going to be a 4-track demo of which two songs are new, two are not demo, sorry, EP, and 2 songs are new, 2 songs are live. Is it a prelude to another full length?
We've definitely got a full length written. We're recording it right now. Like I've got some of the drum tracks. We're working towards getting the bass tracks, but the thing about it, like half of it we wrote during lockdown, the other half we wrote afterwards and sort of consolidated. And I've made more of an effort to involve the other members as well to try and combine the creative efforts and inclinations. And we have this, we're lucky enough to have this setup where our drummer, who is a drum teacher, has his own studio and has a number of microphones set up with a kind of recording platform. And we can just focus on the quality of the performance rather than, you know, spunk £500 a day in a posh studio, and you're probably going to get something good, but I feel that there's a lot more value in spending whatever it takes to get that furnished, and then to take your time until you have the right take. Right. And there is something to be said about the pressure to deliver in the studio and having rehearsed it enough for it. But then with the way that we're doing it, you can kind of create it and refine things as you go along, because invariably songs change, songs morph as you play them more and more and more. And you go, well, actually, we can sort of stop here or have just one guitar for this part that we didn't have before. And that's these things evolve naturally, but at least you'll get some parts of it which contributes to making the final recorded product into more of a convincing entity, as it were. And so, yes, you know, the thing about the EP is the first song is very much I'm not saying this to big us up, but it's a bit of a ripper of a song. You know, it really tears through and it's savage. And this second song, I think, is going to surprise people because there's a bit the simpler structure. There's clean vocals. There's a kind of almost industrial edge, and it's like nothing we've ever released before. But then the stuff on the album, there's like, again, stuff that's not like anything we've recorded before or released before, but in the way that it's kind of thrashier and deathier and has these like D-beat parts and is the sort of almost Slayer-like thrash, but you know, tuned to our B tuning, and it's fun to play and it's catchy, but it repeats enough. I would encourage anybody to make their own mind up about whether they like it or how good they feel it is, but I obviously wouldn't put it out if I didn't absolutely believe that it was it stood on its own, right? And it's going to be quite an aggressive record in some ways, this next album as well. That's you know, to furrow that tedious cliche, which is like, this is more brutal than everything we've released before.
This is our most brutal album.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways it will be, in some ways it'll be different.
Wow. Now, speaking of things morphing and evolving, and I'll wrap up with this question, and I'm asking it because about a year ago I spoke to Ross Dolan on the podcast, and I asked him about a particular line on a very much an Immolation deep cut, and he told me a whole story about it, and it was so cool because it was something I'd picked up, and he was like, "Oh yeah, no, I know exactly why it came out the way that it did." One thing, like if I think of definitive Damim, the like as soon as the name pops into my head, the part of the song I always hear instantly is on All I Want to Know Is How It Ends. There's that bit that the song builds up to at the end where, you know, you're doing this fucking awesome like shout singing, and you go, and still with anger as I think about you in death every day, the absurd and the grotesque, the abject order of existence. But that particular sequence has always been to me something that there's nothing else like it on the rest of the record. It comes completely from left field, but it is fucking brilliant, and it's such a perfect way to close off the record. How did that evolve, and where did the idea for that come up with?
So there's two threads to this, I suppose. One is the music itself, the other one is lyrics. And this, again, that song, the very beginning of the song, I think I played in a rehearsal room with my this guy who became our bassist for a while in the early 2010s, called Dave. And he's a really good drummer. He's very modest guy, and he's very, very solid. And I played that probably in the early 2000s, like the beginning of that song. This is what I'm talking about. Old riffs, they stick around, and they remain. If they remain playable after donkey's years, then it means they must be. They should have some sort of permanent abode where they can exist, right? And so that actually took a while to finalize into a song, but it existed as quite a complete demo for a while. And that last section, there were more guitar parts, and it's, you have that thing where you fall in love with the demo and you try and recreate it, but it's always a bit frustrating where like one of the kind of the extra layers isn't there, but the final result was perfectly representative nonetheless. But in terms of the musical creation process, in fact, any creation process, you asked me how that came about. And all I can tell you, in a sense, is to tell you that going into any creative endeavor, you have to just trust, cliche alert, trust the process, trust that you'll have the means to navigate the components that you're putting together, and trust that you will have the good taste to determine what to best do with them. And then you come out of that at the end and you look at something that you're happy with, that feels right and feels complete, and you're like, how on earth did I do that? And you have no idea. In a fundamental, very real sense, you're like, I don't know how I did that. I just played and until it kind of made sense, and I layered things until it worked, and then I sort of tried to put things together, and when it felt stilted, I threw it away and I started again. Right? That's the sort of way that it came together. So that's, in a way, that's all I can tell you. But that feeling of how on earth did I do that is perennial, right? Every single time. But then you start again on something else, and as it emerges into something that's convincing, you're like, wow, that's great. We're doing well with this. And then you come out the other end, and the same thing happens. With regards to lyrics, well, it's I guess it relates to personal experience. I mean, everything does, right? And if you're an artist, you're going to express something that means something to you personally. But I suppose there's the experience of shocking and world-changing bereavement. And I suppose I don't really like to explain lyrics in general, because I think there's so many layers and different angles and meanings that are tied up into the very way that those words are arranged, at least when it's a good lyric, which I will be first to admit it isn't necessarily always the case. I'll try to make sure that it is more than not. But when it is, I do believe in it. I do believe that sort of Gordian knot of meaning should not be untangled by the author. You should definitely allow all the kind of the layers of that. Again, I'm mixing my metaphors, but that sort of onion of like convoluted streams of consciousness and kind of whatever the meaning, that it should be just left to the person experiencing it to determine how they connect to that, right? And how they often there are the reason I'm saying that is there are multiple strands of meaning that are tied together, and instead of saying them in like 5 paragraphs, you have one line that's evocative enough to push all of those buttons at the same time, and can only achieve that particular juxtaposition of meaning and evocation with that particular line, right? So there is that aspect, but in this particular one, at least one of the strands is that, you know, you'll have firstly the fact that like death is inevitable, right? And not only it's inevitable, it's an intrinsic part of the way that the world is arranged, right? So the sort of the physics of the world and our place in the stream of time mean that this is the only way that things can exist. So, but not only that, somebody who suffers extremely at the end of their life, they're often, in the grand scheme of things, actually quite lucky. Do you see what I mean? Like they're actually at the top end of the kind of the sum of experiences that a human can experience if you compare to all the other sort of possibilities. And if you don't find that shocking or absurd or disconcerting, then, you know, I don't know what to tell you.
Well, I will tell you this as we wrap up. Two things I'll say. One, if I were your producer, I would say do more of those vocals because they're fucking brilliant. Secondly, let us definitely not wait 176 episodes to do another one of these. It was an absolute blast, mate. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, no, a huge amount of fun catching up with you, and I hope you saw, like, way back when, you know, I was starting to pick up bigger guests, and I had, you know, renowned public masturbator Dave Ellison on the podcast before that scandal broke. I did push.
I thought you meant conversational masturbator, but you meant literal. Okay.
Yeah, no. So that no. So I was pushing Damim on that episode because I always felt indebted to you for you know, being the first dude, aside from my friend Marco, to put your hand up and say, you know, you would join me on this endeavor. So I really appreciate that very much, and, you know, like I said, I would do more of these in the future. I
would add this, not that I want to you know, outstay my welcome any further than I already have, but I feel that this is an end in itself. You know, we're not sort of, this isn't a perfunctory sort of, this isn't a means to an end. I mean, in some ways it is, obviously, but at the same time, I feel it should be an end in itself, and it absolutely is. So thank you very much for having me, and yeah.
Excellent. Cool, mate. I will speak to you again soon.
Cheers.
Keep it real on the streets. That was World Turned Hell by Damim off the forthcoming EP of the same name. It will be out courtesy of Church Road Records on June the 1st, I believe, this coming Friday. So make sure that you check that out when it drops. As a matter of fact, actually, that's not June the 1st, it's June the 2nd. So make sure that you diarize that. But hopefully it is a prelude to new music, because it's long overdue as far as I'm concerned. But great having Nathanael on. A very, very smart guy. I said this last week on the podcast. He's one of those dudes that I actually actively have to work to keep up with him. But great having him on, and we will definitely do another one of those. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and a big thank you to Nathanael for his time. Definitely not his last appearance on the podcast. Right, let's talk now about some new music, my friends. And as I said at the top of the hour, I don't know, well, not top of the hour, the top of the show. I don't know whether or not May the 26th has some sort of unholy cosmic significance, but sweet Jesus, were we showered with blessings of the Hooved One this past weekend. No less than 8 fucking beastly releases. Well, I should say 8 beastly releases, 7, and then one that's not bad. One that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. You guys can probably guess which one I'm talking about. But I'm going to talk about a couple that I really like. So first of all, we start the journey in Atlanta, Georgia, where CLOAK have just unleashed their 3rd album, Black Flame Eternal. Easily their angriest, most accomplished album to date. I don't think it's surprising at all that I've had several members of the Legion DM me to let me know that they really, really like it, that it's one of their favorite albums of the year thus far. Obviously, we've had Scott Taysom on the podcast and, done our part in building up some excitement about the record. But, really, everybody in this band, when you listen to this record, you will hear it is in top-notch form, peak form. And I would say especially Scott Taysom. His vocal performance is a huge step up from what he did on previous records. I would argue that even if you weren't necessarily a fan of their previous releases, Black Flame Eternal absolutely needs to be in your rotation. If I could compare them to anybody in terms of the stride they've taken forward, I've spoken about Necrosphere, who are their label mates on Season of Mist. Necrophire's new record really sounds like a band that's found their feet, that are confident in their own skin, confident in their sound, and I would argue that CLOAK is in exactly the same boat. Next up, we have Immortal returning after a 5-year absence with War Against All. Now, I said earlier there was one that wasn't quite as great. My expectations were very low. This one follows up Northern Chaos Guards. As I said, they came out 5 years ago. I quite enjoyed that record, and I'm obviously a huge fan of Immortal, and have been really since Diabolical Full Moon Mysticism. But as I said, could not help but be skeptical, or at the very least have some crooked hippo eyes thrown the way of the new music that I heard. But this is not necessarily the best album you're going to hear in 2023, but songs like Thunders of Darkness are genuinely enjoyable. And it in my view, proves that even though this isn't a perfect record, and the Immortal calling card of, speedy, frostbitten black metal may have been played out at this point, but there is definitely still some gas left in Immortal's frostbitten tank. Now, from grizzled veterans to a group of young bloods, relatively speaking, Church of the Dead have dropped their 2nd album, Beyond Death, on Redefining Darkness Records. It is a beast that I have been anticipating for a while, and it absolutely crushes. I am very, very pleased to say the end result, as you can hear there, is absolutely more than worth the wait. This is brutal, blackened death metal. that is not only packed with stellar riffing, it has got hooks and grooves to spare, and there's also a couple of really nice surprises along the way, including a wicked good cover of Mayhem's Chainsaw Gutfuck. I'll actually play that later on in the episode, so stick around for that if you're too lazy to jump on Spotify and listen to it right now. Now, speaking of Mayhem, Mayhem's ex-guitarist, Blasphemer, has reportedly discovered a tape of old Mayhem riffs that he wrote for the band back in the late 90s, and that inspired him to create Black Royal Spiritism, which is a record he has now released under the moniker Ruim. Considering that Blasphemer is regarded as a musical prodigy that basically saved Mayhem after the death of Euronymous, and was the architect of masterpieces like Ordo ad Chaos and Grand Declaration of War, I think it would have been naive to expect anything less than brilliance from Black Royal Spiritism. But this, to me, is truly a work that vastly exceeds even, the loftiest of expectations. There's a definite and an immediate familiarity to songs like Blood Sacrifice, Enthronement, and The Triumph of Night and Fire. But it feels to me like time away from black metal has definitely enhanced Blasphemer's creativity, because as you listen to the record, you'll find that littered across the deluge of brutal, uncompromising, cult, nasty riffing is also a bunch of really, really cool surprises. That includes things like really compelling ambient sequences that have shades of Ordo ad Chaos thrown to them. Chant-like clean vocals deployed by Blasphemer in this instance. And by the way, he does everything on this record aside from the drumming. And his vocals, to me, are exceptionally surprising because they do have a bit of a hint to Attila from time to time, but he kind of has his own personality in there as well. And speaking of vocalists, fans of the Texas black metal legends Apsu are also going to be thrilled to learn that the legendary Prescriptor McGovern makes an appearance on a reworked version of Fall of Seraphs, first aired on Mayhem's Wolf's Lair Abyss record, but reworked for this album. But yeah, great stuff there as well. Ultimately, to my ears, I think Black Royal Spiritism is brilliantly written. It is excellently produced. It is thoughtful, and it is a punishing masterpiece by one of the very best musicians in the black metal scene. I can find absolutely no fault in it whatsoever, and therefore it proudly receives the highest accolade in all of music, the accolade of top notch. The song Ewig Dissonance, the band Ruim, and the album Black Royal Spiritism. It's available right now on Peaceful Records. Authored by the great blasphemer, formerly of Ruin, not formerly of Ruin, formerly of Mayhem, I should say. And speaking of which, I have actually tried to implore Blasphemer to appear on the podcast. But sadly, the always very helpful gentleman who helps me with Peaceful Records PR-related malarkey said that to date, Blasphemer has been unresponsive. So when you do go to their Bandcamp, link in the description to the podcast, and you buy yourself the new Ruim record, then let's try and make enough noise that he has no choice but to satisfy the call of the Legion and come on into the Necrosphere. A couple of other releases from the weekend that I would definitely suggest you make sure you add to your shopping list, or at least your rotation. Olkoth have put out At the Eye of Chaos, one I might talk about on future episodes of the, or a future episode of the show. Onfod have put out Det Osterbotniska Morkrit, and then Notfert also put out I Helvetis Forakt. So a busier weekend than I can recall for a long time. What does the future hold? Well, we're going to find out next, my friends, because if you're a fan of Brian Stelter, if you think Brian Stelter is a top-level newsman, then it's time for you to get to stepping, because this is my weekly news rant. As always, our odyssey begins on metalstorm.net, and they don't sponsor the podcast or anything like that, but I do just want to say, considering the fact that I reference them so very often, they are by far my favorite metal news website. Really the only metal news website that I consult at any degree of frequency. So if you don't check them out yet, then I would suggest that you do. But I suspect that almost everybody that listens to this podcast would count themselves amongst the people that read this website. Anyway, first of all, we've got news about Immortal. They've got a new record out, as we spoke about earlier in the show. They've presented a new lyric video. Nothing for us to look at there, but Ethereum have dropped a new single. It says here, as part of their forthcoming studio release at Storm's Edge, melodic death metalers Ethereum now premiere an animated video clip for the second single titled Nip Aenon. I know that I have mispronounced that, but let's see what this sounds like. I'm not the biggest fan of melodic death metal, as all of you know. I've got a very, very low tolerance for the kind of tropes and Iron Maiden derivative riffing that you hear from the vast majority of melodic death metal bands, in my view. But I'm willing to give Ethereum a go, so let's hit it. Nice guitar tone. I think the drums sound pretty good as well. Vocals don't sound bad. The melody, let's say the cut and thrust of the song, I don't know whether that's really up my street. It does have a slight whiff of Rotting Christ to it, but it also has a let's try and find a politically correct word that I can use. A effeminate touch to it as well, in my view. It's there's just something about it that lacks severity and that lacks menace. The music video looks like a cutscene from a video game, but I mean, again, I'm rarely swayed by music videos. From my perspective, I think the vast majority of bands shouldn't waste their money investing in one, and they should be, do a good-looking and economically efficient lyric video, and that's pretty much all you need. I think the days of people sitting on the couch watching a video end to end, I think that's long gone. But yeah, this is a 6 out of 10 effort so far, and I know we're only 53 seconds in, but that's where I'm standing right now. Let's give it another 60 seconds. When that fire is coming into the music video, and they doing almost like a chanting gang vocal, I think that sounds pretty cool. I can definitely see a lot of people are going to like this. I mean, if you had to compare them to the likes of Amon Amarth, who I think they're playing in the same ballpark, this is significantly better in my view. I wouldn't object if somebody were to put this on at their house, but for me personally, with the vast majority of stuff that is, or with the sheer deluge of great music that's come out over the course of the last couple of months, I couldn't possibly see myself going back to that willingly. So that's where I stand on it. 6 out of 10 is my view on that Ethereum single. Okay. Graceless present a video for This Ends with the World in Ruins. Dutch doom death metal operatives Graceless share a brand new music video for This Ends with the World in Ruins. The track off the band's latest record, Chants from Purgatory. Video clip created in cooperation with David Pellizzoni. Not familiar with his work. I quite like the title of the song though. There's certain songs where you see the title and it just sounds like it's going to be cool. I remember, back before I knew Mike and before I discovered Tombs, I can't remember which song exactly it was, but I remember seeing like a Tombs record, seeing the song title, and I thought, yeah, that sounds like it might be up my street. Anyway, it says here, comment the band of the song. The song deals with confrontations, religions, and other behaviors that will cause the complete destruction of our society. Artificial intelligence could be one of our potential downfalls, so it seems appropriate to let a machine determine the content of the video. The result is outright eerie, weird, uncanny, and intense. So they seem to have done the music video with AI, which, again, it's interested to see what happens. So let's dig into it. That is fucking badass. Very cool riff. Love the vocals. I think the drummer is especially good. That little double bass roll that he adds towards the end of the verse, it's one of those little 1%ers, those little added touches that just really elevates the song. And then just the overall vibe, the feel of the song, I love, right up my street. I like this music video as well, I've got to say, and I would argue, I was talking about lyric videos earlier, maybe another option is to do some more AI music videos, because this looks fucking cool. I like the, I mean, I don't know, I would love to dig deeper into exactly how they have created these music videos. Like, are they telling the AI, listen to the song and, show me images that that it evokes, in your, overlaid with your programming? I'm very curious to see how this actually gets created, but I like it. I think it's very cool. Everything about the song so far, I'm digging big time. That part when the song gets heavier and that extra beef kicks in is so fucking cool. This is a great example of a band who's not bringing a single thing that's new to the table, but they take the blueprint that they're working with and they just execute it to absolute perfection. 2 massive thumbs up from me on that. Well done to the gentleman from Graceless. That is fucking cool, and I'm going to have to check out the rest of that album. That's one that for sure slipped under the radar. Vomitory have put out a new single. They just released their new album this past weekend, actually, and it wasn't on my list, as you guys probably noticed. I didn't like that first single very much. And, again, 7 new albums, 8 if you include Immortal, that are absolute essential listening. Limited time. I wasn't necessarily going to, carve out a slot in my day to listen to the new Vomitory album, but we can listen to the new single at the very least, and see if it's an improvement on the first one. They made a tactical error not making this the first single of the album, because that's way better than the first one that they put out. Nice, rolling aggression, vocals sound cool. Again, nothing new, nothing spectacularly original. When it comes to death metal, the competition this year is fierce. I mean, there's Nightmare, there's Church of the Dead, there's, so many bands that have brought out good stuff and are about to still bring out new stuff. You kind of wonder if you're looking at this as a, in terms of the amount of attention that Vomitory are going to get, they're going to have their fans for sure, but, in the grand scheme of things, how much attention are they going to get total? I don't know, but I like it. I don't, it's not blown me away to the degree that Graceless did, but I don't mind this at all. And again, I can definitely see there's going to be people that are going to be digging it. And there's certainly enough people on my Twitter account that I know would, would really, really be into that. All right, Yob are introducing a new drummer after they recently parted ways with their longtime drummer Travis Foster. Yob are now happy to announce that Dave French is officially joining the ranks as their new permanent drummer. I'm a very big fan of that band. The last record that they did I thought was absolutely sensational. So hopefully they're going to be putting out some new music soon, is what I was driving at there. Hex Vessel return with their 6th studio album. It says here, on September 22nd, 2023, Hex Vessel will return with their 6th full-length studio album entitled Polar Veil. For a first preview of the new music, give a listen to the single Older Than the Gods featuring Okwoi from Bolzer on guest vocals. Just a side note, Bolzer, a band that is very, very popular amongst many of my friends and associates, and I have yet to see the appeal. Not hating on them. I've listened to some of their stuff and thought it was decent, but I've not ever heard a Bolzer song or a Bolzer record that's made me go, wow, this is absolutely incredible. Changes everything. So just as an aside. Hex Vessel, I've had limited exposure to them, but for all of the shade I throw at bands with names I dislike or that I think sound stupid, I will give them this. I think the name Hex Vessel sounds fucking brilliant. It, again, sounds like the kind of band that I ought to like. So let's find out whether or not Older Than the Gods lives up to that. This opening scene on the music video looks a bit like something out of Fargo, which, just to say, I have mentioned this a few times on the podcast, but if you have not watched the first 3 seasons of the podcast TV series, I strongly urge you to change that because it is absolutely brilliant. Anyway, let's get back to it. We'll get back to it in a second. There's something very meditative and at the same time quite epic about that opening piece. I like those chanting vocals. I like the melody and the riff. The immediate band that came to mind when I was listening to that, and I'm frankly not even entirely sure why, but I thought about Crippled Black Phoenix almost immediately after immediately when the song kind of kicked in properly. But yeah, so far so very good. I'm digging this very much.
I sing for the dawn. I grow. I sigh. I echo through the old. I melt. I boil. I toughen like iron. I've weathered all these years. A riddle in the storm.
I like that the song kind of took a slightly different direction when the verse kicked in from that opening riff as well. Like the opening riff seems to set the scene, and then when the actual verse kicks in, it's a slightly different key, slightly different approach. Not slightly different key actually. Sorry, that's probably my musical illiteracy coming in there. But you guys know what I mean. Like it's not directly following the melody set by that opening riff. It's doing kind of its own thing, and then you have that really, really catchy chorus that's coming out there as well. That doesn't necessarily sound like they're overtly trying to be catchy. It's just very well written. It's a great progression out of the verse. Love it. I think that, my friends, is most definitely earning a top-notch seal of approval this week. I like that very, very much. Definitely going to be looking forward to the record when it comes out on September the 22nd. So well done to the men, and by the looks of the photo, women from Hex Vessel. All right, let's move on. Evanescence to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Fallen on their Australian tour. One of the worst bands possibly in the history of music, in my opinion. They are, as far as metal music is concerned, on a par with Papa Roach in terms of being complete and utter dreck. I remember when this nonsense came out, that god-awful Bring Me Back to Life. I had an ex-girlfriend who probably... I speak to a friend of mine about bad pennies from time to time. She was the worst pennies. Like she wasn't just a bad penny. She was a bad dollar, like a bad case of $100 bills. And it's a relationship I was in for 4 years. You look back at it and you go, that fucking relationship shouldn't have lasted 4 days. But anyway, I remember that she was completely and utterly obsessed with Bring Me Back to Life. In addition to other, what I would see as music that perfectly soundtracks her approach to life. Things like Tori Amos and stuff like that, all of which I now find unlistenable. But I'll say, right here, right now, I would listen to Limp Bizkit every day of the week for the rest of my life before I listen to Evanescence. The only thing that's almost worse than Bring Me Back to Life is that Papa Roach song that they were I don't even know the name of it. They were super popular, it was super popular, where he's like, cut me into pieces, this is my last resort. I mean, that sort of shit is, if I took over the world, one of the first things that would happen is I would take that loser from Papa Roach and have him tossed in the gulags for that song. Right, Slideer re-signed with Damim Morty Productions. They did a very, very cool album back in 2013 that I really loved, and I posted about it on the socials. I might even have played it on this podcast. So let's see the news. It says, Damim Morty Productions are pleased to announce that Slideer, one of Ireland/Iceland's premier black metal entities, have renewed its bond with the label for the follow-up to 2018's The Futile Fires of Man. The forthcoming record bears the title of White Heart! And is an intense trip into some of the most immersive misanthropy black metal has to offer. Composer Joseph Deegan allows us a sneak peek at what's to come. No music, of course, but just his description. I would describe our art's aura as deeply honest and heartfelt. My blood boils with contempt for so much of this world that it can sometimes be difficult to focus on anything else. Thankfully, I can channel these emotions into a creative endeavor such as this album. In the oversaturated pantomime that is today's black metal scene, it can be near impossible to find sincerity. Whatever you may think of Slideer, just know the passion is genuine. So he's basically saying, hey, listen, all of what's coming out in black metal sucks, but my band is good, so listen to us. I've got to be honest, I don't know if that's a winning strategy. And equally, has this guy not listened to black metal for the last 10? I mean, I would argue certainly 10, maybe even 15 years. But definitely, I mean, since 2016, it has become progressively harder every single year to pick a top 20, top 30 favorite, extreme metal albums of the year list. And the vast majority of what's dominated that list has been black metal. So you're saying that Ecclese, Virtue Humanitatis, Selbst, Tombs, Dryvax, the Ruins of Beverast, Panzerfaust, I mean, fucking hell, the list goes on and on and on. as overrated pantomime. That is pathetic. That reads to me like the words of, number one, a fucking loser, and number two, somebody who is driving a 2001 Toyota because they can't afford anything else, has never driven a car produced beyond 2015, and is saying modern cars are crap. It's just something that immediately, reflexively, it just pisses me off when people say stuff like that. And I like Sadir's music very much. I mean, again, you can go back and check the socials. I've posted about them. You know, I really like the band. I mean, I love Damim and most of the bands that are on the label. But that's just such a completely lame thing to say. It's bad enough coming from the Ishans and the Tom Warriors of the world, but, you know, somebody who's, you know, relatively obscure in the scene, and, you know, Sladir are, I think they've been around since the early 2000s, but they're not exactly a legacy band. As I said, it doesn't sit right with me. Concerning the new album, you can expect a far more aggressive offering this time, full of passion, hate, venom, and honesty. Most of the material was written between 2018 and 2019, and the recording process actually started a couple of years ago, but we only recorded our individual parts when the inspiration was strong and the fire was burning, particularly regarding the vocals. The passion needed to be high. Luckily, however, there has been a seemingly endless supply of fuel for what needed to be a spiteful performance. We live in interesting times. All right. I mean, will I look forward to the record? Yeah, I'll definitely listen to it. But in my heart, I will feel resentment towards Joseph Deegan. Like, normally, the dumbest shit that we discuss on this News Rant segment is reserved for our brief and usually climactic trip to the Democrats' Guide to Rock Music. And usually it's Corey Taylor trying to school us on politics, or, you know, Sebastian Bach trying to tell us why the vaccine is the best thing ever. But that, I think, it's going to take some doing to top that quote for sheer fucking stupidity, in my opinion. All right, Onfod, their upcoming album has been released, full album stream launched. Again, spoke about that earlier. That is a fantastic record, well worth you guys checking out. Of course, we also played them on the podcast. I think it might have been when I did the News Rant with Nassos. We listened to the first single. And by the way, I know a lot of you have said that, you really like when I get a guest on to do these segments, and I agree with you. They're always a lot of fun, but it's also always time dependent. So I will do it when time and schedules allow. And of course I've got, my associates in the Horsemen who, would be awesome to have as co-hosts on these sections. It is also fun to get other people's views on stuff. But it's not going to be every single week, but I mean, it's going to happen more often for sure. And the other thing to remind you all of, actually, as we're talking about Horsemen, on July the 29th and July 30th, if you're living in the UK, make sure you get over to the Hairy Dog in Derby for Reaper Fest 2023. There you will bear witness to the Ruins of Beverast, Heathen Deity, and Ralph Schmidt and Ultha performing what are most likely going to be absolutely killer sets. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be interviewing a couple of bands, doing a couple of in-person episode recordings for this podcast. And this is actually one of those shows that I'm going to go to, rather than just saying that I'm going and then deciding to stay home. So, hopefully I can meet a couple of you guys there. Right, other news. Black Label Society are in the studio producing new tunes. Bees Made Honey in the Vein Tree. Now, I was saying Hex Vessel earlier is a fantastic name for a band. Bees Made Honey in the Vein Tree is the exact opposite. That's the sort of name for a band that gets your head shoved down the toilet and the chain gets yanked for the next half an hour. And I see they've got a new single out, but they just have a Bandcamp embedded, Bandcamp embedded player there, so I'm not going to bother. We've got Miasmes next. They have premiered a new song. It says here, Calvaire, the new preview track from Miasmes' forthcoming studio record, Repugnance, has surfaced online. The new outing comes out on June the 9th via Les Acteurs de l'Ombre Productions. Great label that, and a label that has done a lot in the last couple of years, especially recently, I feel, to really kind of push the French black metal scene, which has always been great, but is also in a golden age currently, in my opinion. So always interested when there's a release out on that label. Never heard of Miasmas before, but we're about to find out whether they make the grade. You know, with some bands, it's about like the melody. With some bands, it's about, little touches they throw in, the grooves, the hooks, all of that sort of stuff. With some bands, it's just about the vibe. I mean, and that to me is just about the vibe. There's, again, absolutely nothing original about the tune, but it just works. I like it. I think it sounds very cool. Not sure it's quite top-notch level, but I think it's certainly very enjoyable, very entertaining, second tier black metal. That's probably the best way to describe it, and I don't mean that in a bad way at all. I mean, there's the first tier can only contain the very elite of the elite, but I like what these guys do. So let's get back to it. No, I think it's cool. Definitely going to add that to the list of things to look out for on June 9th. Okay, next up we've got Paradise Lost re-recording their Icon album for its 30th anniversary. It says here, to celebrate 30 years since the release of their Icon album, the legendary Paradise Lost have decided to re-record this iconic music output. More info coming soon. The band comments, Icon, our fourth album, was released in 1993, and for its 30th anniversary, we are re-recording it and doing a extra special vinyl release. That's all we can share for now, but watch this space for more information and a few special announcements very soon. Quite surprising. I wouldn't have seen them as a band that would have done re-recordings, and that album in particular, I don't necessarily, it doesn't scream out to me as something that needs a re-recording. I remember when it came out and being quite jarred by the change in direction, or by the fact that the band suddenly became so much more accessible in their sound. It's because at the time I was very strongly wedded to Gothic and to Shades of God, and in fact, actually at the time, Shades of God in particular, like I loved that album, and I still do, and I still think it's one of the best Paradise Lost albums ever. So Icon took a while for me to acclimatize to, but when I did, I mean, fucking hell, there's some incredible songs on that album. Ember's Fire, Dying Freedom, Widow, True Belief, Colossal Rains. I mean, it's just one banger after the next. I'm curious as to, again, what they can bring to the table that's new or interesting, because just a plain old re-recording, I don't necessarily think that's. I think that's beneath them, quite frankly. I've also only really, with re-recordings, I've only ever seen it work once, and that was when Testament did First Strike Still Deadly, because they didn't necessarily rework the songs, but there was a bit of extra oomph injected into tracks like Into the Pit, Over the Wall, and stuff like that. Icon doesn't need extra oomph. It's it's got oomph up to fucking yin yang as things are. So interesting choice. But as long as it doesn't derail them doing a new album anytime soon, then they can celebrate its 30th anniversary in whichever way they choose. And I'm still interested in hearing what it sounds like. So, Fear Factory recruit Pete Weber as their permanent drummer. Pete Weber, it says here, was told not to bring his lawyer to the contract signing because, and this is a quote, Dino has it all in hand. That's bullshit, of course. I don't know who Pete Weber is. But anyway, this Fear Factory tribute act that Dino's put together, best of luck to them. Mizmor present music video for No Place to Arrive single. They are on Profound Law Records. Again, Profound Law is an instant must listen. Mizmor, I can vaguely remember liking something that I've heard of theirs in the past, but again, clearly it didn't leave that much of an impression on me that, they're one of my go-to bands. But it says here, No Place to Arrive, the newest single from the Pacific Northwest solo outfit Mizmor's forthcoming long player, Prosaic, has premiered online in the form of an official music video clip. The latter was directed and edited by Zeph Deans, and Prosaic drops on July 21st, 2023. Right, let's listen to it. So this is a pretty lengthy tune. It clocks in at 10 minutes, 27 seconds, which, again, very interesting that would be the first single. But I'm curious to hear where this goes, because this could... Right now, we're in the build-up phase, and there has to be payoff for the build-up phase in order for this to work. So far, the build-up has been pretty interesting. And I quite like the music video too. But like I said, if we're gonna jump 5 minutes in and it's still the same riff, that's a different conversation. So let's hear where we're at around the halfway mark of the song. Okay, so that definitely, there's for sure some payoff there. I'm not sure what happens after the acoustic guitar kicks in, but I think this is really good. I like the music video. I think the bits that we've heard of the song, I think, are very interesting, very engaging, and this is certainly one that's going to require a full end-to-end listen, but Mizmor can add themselves to the list of artists whose new music I'm actually very excited about. All right, let's do one or two more if we can find any, and then we will jump over to the Democrats' Guide to Rock Music. There's a band here on Redefining Darkness called The Bleeding. They say before their new studio album Monocrator hits the streets on June the 9th via Redefining Darkness Records, Death Thrashers The Bleeding offer in listening another advanced track called Chainsaw Death Cult. And they only have a Bandcamp player there, so fuck it, we'll give that one a skip. Live Burial have called it quits. No idea who they even are, so I can't imagine I'm going to be spending a huge amount of time sobbing about that. Death Awaits. Death Metal Slammers Death Awaits have launched a music video for their newest single, Whatever Ectomy, which is part of their EP effort Voracious Instinct. The latter was mixed and mastered by Kevin Paredes. No idea who Death Awaits are, but let's give it a quick spin. It's very much a guilty pleasure to like this sort of shit, in my view. You know, and I've heard a couple of songs like this that have pulled off really well. Annotations of an Autopsy, who I don't even think exist anymore. They've got a couple of decent tunes in this style. They did add a bit of extra fire to it, I think, which helped. And their live shows were absolutely fantastic. But yeah, this is not doing a whole lot for me, I've got to say. You know, the music video comes across as guys who are desperate to be rappers. The singer reminds me a bit of White Mike from The Wire, for anybody that's seen that. So yeah, I'm not convinced, but I'm willing to give it another few seconds. Nah, done. If I'm going to listen to that kind of music, I'm going to listen to probably Internal Bleeding as my first choice. And like I said, maybe Annotations of an Autopsy, or, you know, one or two other bands. Molotov Solution had a couple of decent songs as well. They're of a similar ilk. But in the main, it's not really my thing. All right. Last one, and then let's head over to Blabbermouth. Dark Age of Ruin are debuting their debut record is streaming in full. So it says here, Dark Age of Ruin's debut album, False Messiah and the Abstract, was officially released on May the 19th. The band from São Miguel Island in Portugal was founded in 2020 and come to claim the throne of Azorian black metal with an extremely furious and hateful album based on the best that the style produced in Northern Europe during the mid-90s, but with a more raw approach typical of the sound practiced in recent times. It's a fucking bold statement to be making, so let's see if they can match up to it.
An erratic overture!
I'm going to just say right at the start, there's bands that can pull off announcing a song title on a studio record. Hierophant, you know, and obviously I had Fabio on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. They're one such band. There's not many that can do it, and that, my friends, was a misstep. Nope, I'm afraid not. Music's not bad at all actually, but those vocals are terrible. I mean, that is just they're gratingly bad. I would say my strong bit of advice to those guys would be put an ad out, get a new vocalist, and let's take two. Maybe change your name as well, because you need to live down the the shame of that record. That's actually probably a bit of an over exaggeration. It's as I said, musically it's actually pretty reasonable, but the vocals are fucking atrocious. All right, over on Blabbermouth, the first headline that we can see is Cradle of Filth begins recording new album. We'll all be very excited about that. Queen of the Stone Age plays first concert in more than 3 years. Band I would love to see live, but unfortunately, getting tickets to their shows is not particularly easy when you work a full-time job and you can't afford to sit on Ticketmaster refreshing for 4.5 hours. Testament performs as a 4-piece at opening concert of Spring 2023 European Tour. This was big news. Roger Waters releases statement in response to Nazi costume accusations. I don't know whether you guys saw, but he was doing his show in Berlin, and as part of his show, he has a fascistic outfit that he wears that's kind of part of the concept of the wall. And I mean, I don't claim to be the biggest fan of Roger Waters or of Pink Floyd, by the way, so I just happen to know the context of it. It's apparently all part of the concept of the wall. And a couple of folks absolutely spun off the rails, when he did his show in Berlin, even though this is a very similar show to what he's been doing for years and years and years, but be that as it may. It reads here, Roger Waters has defended himself against criticism over his concerts last week in Berlin during which the former Pink Floyd leader displayed Nazi-like symbolism and made what some people have described as offensive comments about Holocaust victim Anne Frank. During the shows at Mercedes-Benz Arena, Waters appeared on stage as the character Pink from the rock opera The Wall during a performance of the song In the Flesh, wearing a black leather trench coat with a red armband featuring 2 crossed hammers instead of a swastika. So he didn't actually have a swastika on, he had a black leather trench coat and an emblem that bore the colors of the swastika, but instead of the swastika actually had 2 crossed hammers. Again, from my understanding, this is pretty commonplace at all of these shows. Nothing, no ill intent meant behind it. And as far as I know, Roger Waters is hard to the left. I mean, he leans so hard, I'm not sure he and I could have a civil conversation. Like, that's how hard he leans. But anyway, it says here, it was later reported that Waters was under investigation for possible incitement by German police, in addition to possibly having committed trademark abuse for the use of Frank's name without the consent of the Anne Frank Foundation, which has trademarked the name. Waters projected Frank's name on a giant screen during the shows, along with other names of contemporary figures, including George Floyd and Shireen Abu Akleh. My recent performance in Berlin has attracted bad faith attacks from those who want to smear and silence me because they disagree with my political views and moral principles, Waters wrote in a statement on Friday, May the 26th. The elements of my performance that have been questioned are quite clearly a statement in opposition to fascism, injustice, and bigotry in all its forms. Attempts to portray those elements as something else are disingenuous and politically motivated. The depiction of an unhinged fascist demagogue has been a feature of my shows since Pink Floyd's The Wall in 1980. I've spent my entire life speaking out against authoritarianism and oppression wherever I see it. When I was a child after the war, the name Anne Frank was often spoken in our house. She became a permanent reminder of what happens when fascism is left unchecked. My parents fought the Nazis in World War II, with my father paying the ultimate price. Regardless of the consequences of the attacks against me, I will continue to condemn injustice and all those who perpetrate it. I really do think this sounds to me like a major storm in a teacup, and this is kind of the I predicted this a couple of years ago, and you see it with any zealous movement, right? So I said a couple of years ago, at some point the woke snake is going to start eating its own tail, and part of the reason I said that is because of the religious characteristics, in the cancel culture movement, in the woke movement. I remember way back, I've spoken about this many times, but, growing up with a bunch of, religious lunatics in South Africa, you kind of knew that the hunt for Satan in every single band had reached its peak and was going to start to unravel when they started spending the majority of their time chasing after bands like Mortification and other Christian metal bands. The argument was they're a soft gateway into Satanism, and they're actually Satanists themselves who use backward masking was the phrase of the day to somehow brainwash the youth. But I mean, this to me is a similar situation to that, really. Rather than focusing on people that are actually doing things or spreading messages that they shouldn't be spreading, or being bigoted in their shows, their art, whatever the case may be. This is a very, very misguided witch hunt, in my opinion. And like I said, I mean, that comes from somebody who's not necessarily the biggest fan of Roger Waters or Pink Floyd, but it just seems to me to be, completely ripped out of proportion here. And, unfortunately, no matter what he says, and again, it means the question I've said before around, intent mattering. I mean, clearly intent doesn't matter here. So it says here, Berlin police spokesman Martin Hallweg later told The Guardian, that bastion of fine journalism, that police in Germany have launched a criminal investigation into Waters over the Nazi-style uniform he wore at the Berlin shows. While Nazi uniforms, flags, and other symbols are banned in Germany, Waters is reportedly being investigated under a separate law of incitement of the people. I mean, lesson learned. Don't play shows in Berlin. If you're not going to stand there in a t-shirt, as a matter of fact, probably not just standing there in a t-shirt and jeans, but if you are in any way going to say something that's remotely controversial, just don't bother to book a show in Berlin. I'm sure he won't mind me talking about this, but because he's posted about it on social media. But Ralf Schmidt of Ultha posted recently that they've apparently had, and I don't know whether one of them was in Berlin, but they've had 2 shows cancelled in Germany recently over the fact that they played one show with Inquisition back in 2017. One show. And as he and I exchanged messages, and I said to him, it feels to me like when it comes to the way that people have gone after them, the big thing that's being missed is that in 2017, Inquisition were an it band. And I remember that very clearly because I remember loving Bloodshed Upon the Empyrean Altar, the record they brought out in 2016, and reading about them in Rolling Stone magazine as like one of the bands to watch, or one of the most exciting bands in metal right now. The scandals and stuff like that, that related to Dagon's love of child pornography and all the other disgusting shit that kind of swirled around the band after that. That only came in 2018. I think it was March 2018, if I'm not mistaken. So, for a band like Ultha to get the opportunity to play with Inquisition in 2017, who wouldn't have taken that? So are we now starting to persecute by association, which is full blown? Because if that's the case, then this is just exactly when they say it's a dog whistle, to use the phrase cultural Marxism. You tell me what else this is other than just naked Marxism. This is exactly what the communists did during the Great Revolution. You were guilty by association. This is what they're doing now. So if Pink Floyd, if Roger Waters is found to be guilty by their standards of racism and anti-Semitism or promoting fascism, does that mean that we're going to retroactively go back and cancel every single band that's ever played with Pink Floyd on a festival or support Pink Floyd? Because if that's the case, we're not going to have a lot of music left very soon. So it's pathetic. That's the only way to describe it. It's completely and utterly pathetic. Okay. Watch as original Biohazard lineup performs live for the first time in 12 years. This is very exciting to me, and I'm still strongly planning to go to Bloodstock this year to go and watch them when they play in the UK, even though I prefer to see them at a club. But I mean, just looking here at the set list, Urban Discipline, Down for Life, Tales from the Hard Side, Black and White and Red All Over, Wrong Side of the Tracks, my very favorite Biohazard song, Shades of Grey, 5 Blocks to the Subway, Howard Beach, a criminally underrated Biohazard song in my view. How It Is, awesome. Tears of Blood, great. Scarred for Life, awesome. Love Denied, Fucking genius. And they've got Punishment and Hold My Own. The only thing they needed to add in here, they could drop the We're Only Gonna Die Bad Religion cover, because I don't like that song. They don't do a bad job of it, but I think the song stinks for the most part. And make old Jackson happy, and let's hear them do Blue Bloods off the first Biohazard album. Maybe the question around that, because of the line of America is the best, maybe they feel that's a little tone deaf in our day and age. But I love that song. Anyways, let's have a quick gander here. So I'm just scrolling through some of the comments. They're just talking about how the band broke up, blah blah blah. Let's see what these and obviously then we've got a bunch of music videos, or not music videos, what looks like cell phone recorded footage here. So we can have a quick gander at what those look like. Let's choose one. Yeah, Urban Discipline. Let's hear what it sounded like. That crowd is surprisingly calm for a Biohazard show, I have to say. And I don't know if it's just because of the angle of where this guy is filming from. He seems to be almost right in front, kind of off to the left side of the stage. But in years gone by, when I've seen these guys play, it's been fucking wild. And I'm not sure. That's not quite as wild as I would have imagined it to be for a Biohazard reunion. It's one of my very favorite things in the world. Vocal interplay on stage. There's just something about it that it creates this feeling of complete chaos and anarchy on stage. Like something can blow up at any moment. I just fucking love it. And they are the masters at doing it. There's no band that does it better. I would actually say there's no band that even comes close. I don't give a shit whether you wake up every single morning and the first thing that you do is listen to the first 4 Burzum albums every single day. You could be the most grim, cold dude on the face of the earth. If you have not seen Biohazard live yet, do yourself a favor. You have to see it, because they are, in terms of raw performance, in my opinion, one of the top 3 best live bands on the planet. And just judging by that video, they still are. Nothing has changed. I've seen them live 5-6 times now. They have always been fucking incredible. Like I would, if this was a 666 countdown, I would put Rammstein ahead of them in terms of live shows that I've seen and enjoyed, and nothing else. To me, they are just absolutely fucking phenomenal. absolute genius. Absolute goddamn genius. They still have the moves on stage as well. I mean, they are, in my view, a masterclass of the difference between playing your music and performing your music. Okay, Pantera's Philip Anselmo says he disavows the Confederate flag. It's ridiculous, man. So it says here, Pantera frontman Philip Anselmo has publicly disavowed the Confederate flag. The 54-year-old singer made the comment during the band's concert last night in Bulgaria. This article came out on the 27th of May, just for those that want to know the context. He was addressing a fan in the audience who was displaying a sign that included Confederate flag imagery, something Pantera has used as part of the band's stage production, and in merchandise designs, including on the Hesher Dream shirt, which had been sold via the official Pantera web store in 2015. Before launching into the closing song of Pantera's set, Cowboys from Hell, at the Arena Sofia in Sofia, Philip told the crowd, "Sofia, I gotta say this, incredible audience. One more thing, there's a person over here holding up the sign, trying to ruin the fucking show. I disavow the fucking flag. I'm sorry, it's ridiculous, man. Keep politics out of shit. It's boring." I mean, fair enough to him doing that. But, you know, I know a fair few folks in Bulgaria. I can tell you right now, I strongly doubt, I might be completely wrong, but I strongly doubt that that dude was trying to ruin the show. I think he was just, you know, if anything, he was just probably leaning into the fact that, you know, Pantera had used the Confederate flag as, you know, an extensive part of the imagery surrounding the band, you know, for the vast majority of the time that they were around. You know, people in Europe, generally speaking, don't really understand and get the significance of the Confederate flag and understand why it's now verboten, whereas, you know, in years gone by, you know, the 70s, 80s, 90s, it was, you know, widely celebrated. It was, you know, the roof on the car of Dukes of Hazzard, you know, Lynyrd Skynyrd had it, you know, plastered all over every single thing that they did, as did Pantera. So for them, I mean, actually, I'm trying to think now of a couple of other bands. Obituary have had it on merchandise as well, and it's not something that's uncommon in metal. And it, you know, there was never an issue with it until, relatively speaking, 5 minutes ago. Now, you know, in the US, if somebody were waving that around at a show, could you make the argument that they're trying to ruin the show? Absolutely. I would say, you know, that's, you know, in America, you should at the very least be clued up enough to understand the significance and understand why it could now be deemed as being offensive. But in Europe, as I said, I think that's I'm going to play the role of the skeptic on that one. I don't think that was done with malicious intent. The fact that he's going out saying he disavows the flag, you know, fair enough. But again, you know, the other thing that I would say, it doesn't matter what he says or what he does. He's forever going to be seen by the people that hate him and the people that want to cancel Pantera as the guy that in 2016 got drunk, you know, did a Sea Heil and shouted white power. He will never live it down. I mean, and this again is the problem with a cancel mentality. What they don't seem to understand is that, you know, people can change. That they celebrate the capacity for, you know, violent criminals and murderers, rapists, and thugs to change, and you know, therefore they support letting them out of prison early. But, you know, somebody who in the cultural context has committed, you know, one of the ultimate sins, as Phil did, he can never change. He will always be that guy, no matter, you know, what different insights he's come, you know, insights and conclusions he's reached over the course of his life. He'll always be that guy. The only way for him to absolve himself is to put a shotgun in his mouth, blow his brains out. I know that's a harsh thing to say. I don't see how they could be necessarily pushing for anything else. Right. Let's read one or two more, and then we'll wrap this up. Is Blackie Lawless using backing tapes for his lead vocals? When I'm up there, I'm singing my ass off, he says. It says here, during a May 25 appearance on Sirius XM's Trunk Nation with Eddie Trunk, Wasp frontman Blackie Lawless was once again asked about complaints from some of the band's fans about the use of backing tracks during the group's live performances. He responded, as transcribed by Blabbermouth, About 10, 12 years ago, we did the Crimson Idol for the first time in its entirety with orchestration. Prior to that, we had just done, I call it the Live at Leeds version, because if you look at the Who did, if you look at what the Who did with the Live at Leeds, which we all thought was live at the time, and we now realize there are overdubs on those as well. Like most live records, we would take the bare bones approach to doing it. Well, we decided to take an approach where we tried to make it sound exactly like the record, and we had never used orchestration or anything like that. So we went in the studio, we took all the tracks off the record as far as the orchestration. We took the background vocal tracks, we took doubles on leads, we did everything. And we took it and we tried to make it sound as much like the record as we could. I stood in the middle of the room that first night in rehearsal, and I swear to you, it was like an out-of-body experience. I had never heard anything like that sound before. I had never played with a live orchestra before, and so this was the closest thing you would get to doing something like that. Listen, I understand both sides of the argument, he continued. For me personally, when I'm up there, I'm singing my ass off, but what's wrong with having enhancement to make something sound exactly like the record? Because you're not going to get a band like Queen or any other band that does big productions like that. 4 guys cannot go out there and reproduce that record. It's impossible. It won't happen. So you want it to sound like the record, or do you want it to sound like a general live performance? And that's a question of taste. I err towards wanting to sound like a general live performance. I don't have a gripe with him using backing vocals. I've looked at a lot of recent live clips of him singing, and I think what he's doing is quite similar to something that, you know, in a different genre, Death Grips actually do. You know, on every single show that they play, they have the vocal track and then the vocalist is vocaling over it. I think that's what's happening with Wasp. I would say maybe the guy at the mixing desk is fading in some of those studio vocals a little more liberally on certain songs, because one of the first you know dead giveaways, aside from some of the clips that you can find on YouTube if you search for them, where you can actually see the glitches with the backing vocal track, is he's singing those songs in the same key as he did as a young man. And name me a lot of bands that are able to, or a lot of vocalists that are able to pull that off, in their 60s. No chance. Not a fucking, I mean, especially not with his vocal style. It's just not going to happen at his age. So that's the dead giveaway. But I mean, the flip side to it is, yes, my preference is for something to be fully live. I like the spontaneity of live. I like errors. I mean, frankly speaking, I would much rather have a error-strewn performance than have something that is, completely perfect and sounds exactly like the album. If I want to hear the album, I'll stay at home and I'll listen to the album. I want spontaneity and excitement, and I want the unpredictable at a show. But that being said, and this was what I was getting at, if somebody is, somebody's at the show and they're enjoying themselves, and you look at most of those recent Wasp shows, the crowd is having the fucking time of their life, then who cares? I don't give a shit. It's if they like it, they want to spend their money on it, then let them do it. And that's the show that's the product that Wasp is putting out. There's a huge amount of other product to consume. I mean, there's bands are complaining all the time about how the touring circuit is overcrowded. So vote with your wallet. Okay, last one. Producer Bob Rock says Jimmy Page and Jack White's praise of Metallica's Saint Anger makes up for other people's criticism. I'm going to call fucking bullshit on that. I don't even have to read the article to call bullshit on that. Do you want to tell me that Jack White sat down and listened to Saint Anger and said, man, that's great, this is a life-changing record? I don't think so. And Jimmy Page, I would argue, I suspect he has better things to do with his time as well. But anyway, it says here, during an appearance on the latest episode of the Talk is Jericho podcast, producer Bob Rock once again defended his work on Metallica's controversial 2003 LP Saint Anger by saying that both Led Zeppelin legend Jimmy Page and former The White Stripes frontman Jack White took the time to say how much they liked the album. I mean, I could maybe understand Jack White because he thought that Meg was a great drummer as well. So, he clearly doesn't know much about music. But I mean, Jimmy Page is a smart man. It says here, according to Rock, White's praise came at a screening of the documentary It Might Get Loud, which co-starred Page. I happened to be in Toronto at the premiere of the film, and Jack came up to me from across the room and he says, by the way, I love Saint Anger. It's an amazing album. And then he left. If he did say it, he was being sarcastic, because it's a fucking terrible album. Page expressed his appreciation for the CD when the producer ran into the guitarist while they were both eating breakfast at a hotel. Jimmy Page, not to drop names, but he's kind of a friend. He was at the Sunset Marquee in London. No, not London, sorry, in Los Angeles. that part I made up. He was sitting eating breakfast on the other side of the pool. Somebody walked by and said, "I'm here seeing Bob Rock." Jimmy said, "Oh, Bob's here." He came over and talked to me, which blew my mind, coming from Winnipeg, that Jimmy Page even knows my name. And he said, "By the way, I love Saint Anger. It's a great album." Rock also addressed the drum sound controversy, explaining, "People comment about the sound, but when we went in, I said to them, I can't set up the drums exactly the same way. I can't do that. It's like, why does metal music have to have the certain sound before it's metal? So I kicked the can a bit in that way." He continued, "We could talk about this for a long time, but really the sound on the drums, on that, I got the first set that Lars ever used when they rehearsed in the house in Oakland. When they first got together, I set it up and Lars stared at it, right, for like months. And then one day he sat down and played, and it was ringing and it was raw, and he said, 'This is it.'" So imagine paying a producer what I would assume to be hundreds of thousands of dollars for him to set up the drum kit and then just leave it. And then, he says to you, "Listen, here's how we're going to get your drum sound dialed in. I'm going to get an old drum kit and then you're going to stare at it for months and you're going to play it. And that's the sound." which is basically what he's saying happened here. I mean, there's no getting around it. The Bob Rock, succeeded in, and kudos to him for doing it, but succeeded in the biggest grift of all time in taking a cent for producing Saint Anger. I mean, it is the sound of a band rehearsing. That is at best what that record is. If even like if you go back, there's good ideas of songs on there. Like if you go and you listen to the All Within My Hands version that they did for the All Within My Hands Foundation or for the S&M 2. Either way, they did like a reworking of it, and they had the orchestra and stuff coming in, and it sounded fucking sensational. But listen to the song on actual Saint Anger. Jesus Christ, it's like my screams when a hammer drops on my foot is more entertaining to me than that. Anyways, I know I do tend to talk about Metallica a lot on this rant, but it's on these news rant segments, but it's because, they're frequently a topic that comes up on Blabbermouth. Anyways, folks, I think that's about it for me for this week, so that is the news rant done. If you stuck around until right now, thank you very, very much. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I had an absolute blast recording it. Next week's guest, I'm not going to say a thing because there is something in the offing that's going to be fucking exciting if it happens. But we all know that I am a superstitious man, and that if I say it's going to happen, it most likely won't. So I'm going to shut the fuck up. What I would suggest you do is keep an eye on Instagram, because if it does happen, I'll post a photo of it next weekend. In the meantime, my friends, in the week ahead, whatever it is you're doing, whatever it is that you spend your time with, stay safe, stay healthy. As promised, I'm closing us off with a Church of the Dead cover of the Mayhem classic Chainsaw Guts Fuck. So enjoy, play loud, and I'll see you bad motherfuckers again next Tuesday.